Well, let's just hit it with some rapid fire. Fill in the blank. Notre Dame and Clemson just announced their new 12-year series, their scheduling agreement that's going to see the two national powers play each other every year between 2027 and 2038. And this is good for blank.
Everyone. This is good for the ACC. It's good for Notre Dame. It's good for Clemson, and it's good for college football most of all. This is awesome. I mean, I would never have thought that I might feel this way, but like I saw the announcement and I started thinking about it, and I was like, do they really want to go and lock themselves into every single year? Is it going to take away the speciality of those games and things like that? I don't think it does. I think you and I have discussed this, that Clemson is a burgeoning rival for Notre Dame. I think it is a modern rival for Notre Dame. I think is a good way to put it. Every game that they played have been for something. Like something has been on the line. The teams have been ranked in the top 15, one or the other, every time they've met. And if you're going to tell me that playing Stanford every year is a rivalry, I am more than happy to replace Stanford with Clemson and let's go.
Yeah. That would actually be even better for everybody, except for maybe Stanford. I don't know. I don't even know if Stanford cares that
I don't think they're
playing Notre Dame, and people keep wanting to tell us it's a rivalry. Yeah, this is a national. Like at ESPN. Like when Notre Dame announces different scheduling things. Like if it's Notre Dame in Pittsburgh or whoever it happens to be. Like. It's not always going to show up on the front page of ESPN.com. Well, this is one in terms of college football. This is a big deal. The fact that because again, these are two teams, one program that's won a couple of national championships somewhat recently. They were both in the college football playoff last year. Notre Dame's been in the playoff 3 times now, including last year, just went to the national championship game. Clemson's basically the power of the ACC since Dabo Swinney and the rise of Clemson football. And even though they had what might have been considered a little bit of a down year overall last year, they managed to get into the ACC championship game and win the ACC championship and get into the college football playoff. So, I mean, you've got, again, just this is great for college football to have a series like this, to have a marquee series like this, that regardless of if it's at Notre Dame or at Clemson, might be cool even to take it to some neutral site type places if they could. I don't know, but I just think it's great for college football to have a marquee series like that. 12 years of this series. It's like you don't see Notre Dame get into these kind of long-term agreements very often. So to do this for 12 years, because like this offseason, was it even like at the end of last season or into the offseason that there was this talk about Notre Dame was going to start playing Clemson, Miami, and State all more regularly. And so just to have this continuous decade-plus deal with Clemson, I think it's just going to be great for everybody concerned. It's going to be excitement regardless of which campus it's played on.
Well, and I was all for them playing Florida State, Miami, Clemson, more like I was all for that trio. But having Clemson every year, it just does so much for Notre Dame's schedule too, right? Because Clemson is a very respected program nationally. They're going to be respected when it comes to strength of schedule, and whether you want to talk about strength of schedule being important or not important or whatever, if you know that you've got a Clemson on your schedule every single year, you know that your schedule is going to be decent. You know what I mean? And I know we're going to get into more details about, strength of schedule as we move forward today. But, it gives you some leeway with what you want to be able to do with your schedule moving forward. This is just win-win all around. Clemson is a natural rival for Notre Dame right now in 2025. They recruit similar areas.
Well, do you buy or sell this, since you've dipped into it a couple of times already? Do you buy or sell this now? Notre Dame Clemson, is it an official rivalry now that they're doing this?
I think it is a modern rivalry, and I want to stress modern because they've only played like 6 or 7, 6 times, 8 times, something like that.
I think it's 8. Yeah.
So 8 times. Obviously, it's not a historic rivalry, right? But they've played enough. They played 6 times in the past like 15 years where it's been important, and I think it's a good matchup. I think it's a good rivalry. Take whatever, I can't even remember what it is. Take the trophy that you've got for Stanford for that rivalry, throw it in the kiln, melt it down, and let's make a different trophy for the Clemson Notre Dame rivalry. That's what I say.
The Palmetto stick, or the Palmetto shillelagh. I don't know
something.
Exactly.
I mean, come up with something.
What it would be. Yeah.
I do think this is a rivalry, though. This is more of a rivalry.
It is now. It is. You're going to play you're going to play each other for 12 years straight, and you're both theoretically going to be contending for for at least college football playoff appearances for the duration of that drive. So I think it absolutely is, and that's the next question. What's the trophy going to be? Because you got to have a trophy if it's a rivalry. Got to come up with something. You do. But I don't disagree with what you're saying about Stanford either. Just kick that right off. You're guaranteeing that you're going to play Clemson every year. And, again, like where college football is from a financial aspect, with everybody having to shell out the kind of money that they have to shell out for NIL and everything else. Like, these are 2 games that, again, are going to, unless one of the 2 teams just has a stinker of a season, it's going to be on national TV. If it's at Notre Dame, it's going to be on national TV / maybe streaming. I don't know. That'll be, whatever happens with that. But my point is, like, there's going to be a high demand for this game every year over the course of the 12 years. And like you talk about a marquee game, being able to sell tickets and have it be in demand from your TV partners and the whole thing. I think it's just a win-win for everybody. And Anthony Solomon said Notre Dame and Clemson saved the ACC. I mean, Notre Dame saved the ACC 5 years ago, saved college football, right? By playing football and joining up with the ACC. And the other side of this is, like, from Clemson's perspective, with all this talk about, are they going to stay in the ACC? Are they going to leave the ACC? Like, this gives them a definite marquee opponent going forward, even if they were to exit the conference at some point, where you're still playing Notre Dame year in and year out. So I think, again, just good for everybody. And for Notre Dame, that's great as well. Like, if something would happen with the ACC and all of a sudden they're not part of that, you're still playing games against the best team in the conference.
And you have to protect yourself, right? You're an independent. You're not guaranteed anything. You've got your, obviously you've got your agreement with the ACC that goes through like 2035 or whatever, 37, whatever it is. If the ACC goes away, then that goes away. And you, at the very least, now you've got a 12-year series with, Clemson, and you can fall back on some of these things. And again, I don't think Notre Dame would ever have a problem filling a schedule if the ACC falls apart. I really don't. There's plenty of teams that enjoy.
No, and look, this is point number 585 as to, yes, teams will line up to play Notre Dame if given the opportunity.
I mean, I would like to see, and this is, I guess, a hypothetical because I don't have the answer, right? How many schools are lining up for a 12-year contract? You know what I mean? Like, not very many.
Yeah.
So that just shows you the brand power that Notre Dame has. And let's be honest, the brand power that Clemson has as well, that they're willing to make this deal with each other because they know that it is mutually beneficial for both programs for this game to take place every single year for 12 straight years. It is mutually beneficial for both.
Now, look, to DJ's point, he says just move the shillelagh to the other SC. The Trojans are going to chicken out soon. Now, it is worth noting that as of right now, next year, 2026, is the last year that Notre Dame and USC are still contracted to play each other. So, like, the series is in question as of right now. Much more so from the USC side than from the Notre Dame side after joining up the Big Ten. And you remember the Lincoln Riley comments and all that stuff. But let's kind of look the length of this schedule. Here's what it looks like in terms of what I would call the marquee opponents year in and year out from 2027 through 2038. So in 27, Notre Dame goes to Clemson and Michigan State. In 28, they play Clemson, Texas, and Miami all at home. In 29, you're home against Alabama, Clemson, and Texas. Pretty healthy schedule there. In 2030, you're at Alabama and Florida State. You're home against Clemson and Indiana. Now, I include Indiana because obviously they were a playoff team, and that's at least different to the schedule. So,
right.
What
you knew I was going to push back on Indiana.
I know. Well, like what they end up being 5 years from now, we'll see. We'll see. Right.
Agreed.
And then 2031, they're at Clemson and Indiana, home against Florida and Miami. You got the Gators coming on the schedule.
I like that.
In 2031. 2032, you're at both Florida and Miami, and then you're home against Clemson and Florida State. You're playing all three of the major Florida schools in 2032, and you host Clemson. In 33, they're at Michigan and Clemson. In 34, you're home against Michigan and Clemson, at Miami. 2035, as of right now, at Clemson is the only what I'd call a marquee. 2036, home against Florida State and Clemson. And then in 37, you're at Clemson and home against Miami. So obviously, there's kind of a concentration there in the middle where it gets a little thick. Do you have any concerns about potentially overloading, overscheduling for Notre Dame by adding Clemson on this 12-year deal?
I mean, to a degree, there are a couple of years where it is very heavy, right? I think specifically 2032, Florida, Miami, Clemson, Florida State. Like you've got the three Florida teams on there.
2030 at Alabama and Florida State, and then Clemson as well.
Yeah, I mean,
and then the year before that, 29, Alabama, Clemson, Texas.
That's a big one. I think 27, I feel like I was a little light with Clemson and Michigan State being the two marquee games. You would want to beef that up.
Again, it's not every year, but there are 4 years where it feels to me like maybe you've got one too many. I
wouldn't mind, if I was making a schedule, I would want 3.5 marquee games, I think. If and it's never going to be perfect.
No, and the thing about this too is we don't know how long Dabo Swinney's going to be at Clemson. I mean, we don't know how long Marcus Freeman's going to stay at Notre Dame. Yeah, remember when they did when they announced the Notre Dame Alabama schedule a few years back, Brian Kelly and Nick Saban were still around, and I remember we're asking, will they both still be around when they actually play these games? And the answer turned out to be no to both of them. But not only you don't know who the coaches are going to be. Just look at Florida State from 1 year to the next. Just outside the college football playoff to disaster.
It's a crapshoot. When you're, especially in major college football, when you're making these schedules, it's a crapshoot. You don't know what these teams are going to be year in and year out. The Division II level, the schedule just came out in March, and I know for a fact that their non-conference games they were finalizing for that year. For this year. So it's a lot different when you're talking about major college football and you're talking about levels below that. And so you're taking a chance. Division II, that you know what you're getting yourself into when you schedule a team that year. You know what I mean? You have no idea what you're getting yourself into in 2036. Exactly. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
My goodness. I'll be pushing 60 at that point. It's that's a long ways off, it feels like. And but the names alone, you can't say that it's not a beefy schedule when you put it together. You know what I mean? Because you anticipate these bigger names to stay at least relevant. I mean, you might have some fluctuation, but you expect them to at least be relevant. Some of those years are a little heavy. I'm not going to lie. And then who knows which ACC team that you've got on your 5 ACC schedule, right, kind of pops up that year.
Right.
Or
will Stanford ever come back from the dead, or
exactly
whoever it happens to be you're playing that year.
You just don't know. And I would, like I said, I would probably aim for 3. And sometimes on this schedule, there's 4. And I think that's a little heavy. But again, you want to be the best, you got to play the best. So I don't really,
but
it
look,
is what it is.
It's interesting because Pete Bavacqua is of a time like back in those early 90s, like when the Miami series ran its course and they decided that they weren't going to play that anymore. And when Florida State was, like he was a Notre Dame student during all that. Like the schedule looked a lot different back then. And he's obviously a Notre Dame alum. So we got kind of like we've talked about this before in terms of Notre Dame and how you go about putting your schedule together. Like, is it more about marquee and putting on big home games, and I guess maybe in part keeping your TV partners happy? I wonder how much of that came into play, especially with Bavacqua's NBC background.
You nailed it.
Yeah,
you nailed. Like I listened to a little bit of Brian and Trevor this afternoon, and they were talking about Pete Bavacqua's background, and his background is TV, and it's what brings eyeballs to the television. Clemson, Notre Dame, Notre Dame, Miami, Notre Dame, Florida State, like those bring eyeballs. Notre Dame, Alabama, Notre Dame, Florida, like those are going to bring eyeballs to the TV, and that's the world that we're living in right now. But
the other side of that, but the payday. Like, that's nice. And you do have to keep the TV partner happy. I feel like, again, like looking at these schedules, there's some nice happiness without even Clemson, being part of this every year, so like there's keeping them happy, but there's also making sure that there's some wiggle room for you to, drop a couple games potentially and still end up in the playoff at the end of the season.
Well, by 2036, it might be a 68-team playoff.
I was going to say, with the way expansion's going right now, I mean,
who knows?
You might just let everybody in. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, but to your point, I totally get where you're coming from, because right now with the 12-team playoff, if you have 2 losses, you're going to need some help to get in. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And when you schedule 4 marquee games like that, you're taking an awful chance.
Right.
And that's only if
and
you
people are going to say, if you lose 2 of those games, people are going to say, well, look, they lost to the only good teams they played.
Exactly. 100%. And, again, that doesn't take into account the NIUs, those kind of trip ups that may happen. It is college football after all. Notre Dame went to the national championship game and lost to NIU. That's reality. And not one person on this planet outside of Husky Nation would have predicted that would be the case, So, yeah, I still love this agreement, but it does add a little bit of weight to some of those years.
I like it. I don't love it just for I really like it in theory. But again, when I look at those like 4 years where it gets, like I said, a little bit thick, and you've got Texas and Alabama and some Floridas, and that's another program that, like any of the 3 Florida schools, because of where they're located and the amount of talent down there, can be national championship contenders in any given season. But again, 100%. Then they could just fall into the ocean like Florida State did last year. And but again, this answers the question in terms of what the scheduling philosophy for Notre Dame is going to be going forward, especially with a new athletic director. It is much more about keeping the TV side very happy and also trying to fill the stadium as much as possible on the regular.
And they're going to make a ton of money with beer sales now and, everything else that they've got going on. I mean, look, Notre Dame never really has an issue filling the stadium per se, but these games will certainly allow for that to continue. You know what I mean? Like, those are going to be some high-dollar items, no doubt.
Thanks for the super chat, Anthony. He says, enjoy the softball game. Vince. He also said Stanford should be a Shamrock Series game in Ireland.
Ooh, not Stanford. Anybody but Stanford. Pass.
I mean, that's honestly one, though, that I wouldn't mind seeing them, like, move around a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, at this point,
I would have to be every year.
Yeah. But Stanford is now on the rotation for the ACC, and that's fine. Like, I know that there is a piece of scheduling for Notre Dame that they want to play against academic institutions. I get it. And Stanford definitely qualifies for, checks that box. And so you have them in the rotation. That's fine. Again, we've talked about this before. Get them on a rotation with Vanderbilt, Stanford, and Northwestern. You know what I mean? You're touching all three major conferences, and great. But I would not want to see any of those three schools on the schedule every year. Rotate them.
DJ said, heard they were negotiating with the ACC for the Clemson game to count as one of the 5 in the agreement. Now, I've heard
it's both.
Both. This is like when you look at the release that they issued, that is not clear. Correct. But I've heard both, that it will and it won't. So I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see.
Yeah, the ACC is saying it won't, and Notre Dame saying it will, and I think that's still under negotiation. So we'll see how it goes.
Outbound, we talked about this yesterday. The Ewers, it's not a rumor, it's a report that he turned down an offer.
Yeah. No, he didn't.
From Notre Dame. Yeah,
no, he didn't.
Totally disagree with that. But if you listen to yesterday's rapid fire, we cover that pretty extensively.
We did. So bottom line, he didn't.
Yeah. But go listen anyway. Yeah. Junior Tuihalamaka fans are mad at us, Vince, that we left him out of our ranking of the top 20 Notre Dame defensive players yesterday. Now, look, we call out other people in the media all the time, so now we're going to turn the tables on ourselves. Is it fair or foul for us to leave Tuihalamaka off the list of Notre Dame's top 20 on the defensive side?
So I had him in my top 20, going into the show, right? But I had left off some guys as well. And that's the thing about the defensive side of the football is you're going to have more than 20 guys contributing. I will say overall, it is foul that we left him off. I think he probably should have been there, but I don't know who I would have taken off. That's the thing about these lists, right? Is if you add, you got to subtract.
So, and I went back and looked at our list. We had 4 linebackers, 4 corners, including Devontae Smith. I included the nickelback as a corner. Actually, because we had Carson Hobbs on there as well. We had 4 defensive ends because we had both Traore and Botelho, and then we had Bryce Young and Josh Burnham on the other side. And then we have 4 defensive tackles as well. So, I mean, that's pretty much a 2-deep across the board. Yeah. And, when you get to 20, that's only 2 shy of what a complete 2-deep would be, So, to me, he did just miss the cut.
Yeah.
So, but, look, one of the people who brought this up said, well, Tuihalamaka had better stats than Josh Burnham. True. He played a couple more games than Burnham because remember Burnham was injured, so he missed a couple of games, and the stats are only slightly better. And I think Burnham's ability to set the edge and do those kind of things, and the versatility because he played both sides. He played both end spots. I think that's pretty important. That versatility that he got, and I think part of the issue, and I know we talked about this, was because I think Tuihalamaka came up a little bit. His biggest contributions came after the injuries to Traore and Botelho. Sure. And so we have to project a little bit that those 2 guys are both going to be healthy. But if they are both healthy, at 100%, they're clearly the 2 best Vipers that they have. And then you've got Logan Thomas, who also got left off the list, who you brought up as well. So that's 4 Vipers right there. So what's left for Tuihalamaka and Logan Thomas if both Traore and Botelho are playing? That's why it's tough. And ultimately he kind of ended up just missing the cut there at the bottom.
Well, and you've got 4 edge guys. I think right now Tuihalamaka is the 5th edge at the moment, in my opinion. And I would take him over Josh Burnham. I would take Josh Burnham over him, as the 4th edge, and Junior's right there at number 5. And look, again, this speaks to how deep this team is. And I
think that's it more than anything. It just shows how deep they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a case for him ahead of Heinisch potentially, but he showed up at number 16, and you were a little bit more, high on Heinisch. And even if we had done the move up, move down, it's
you could make that argument, I suppose. I think Heinisch at the end of the day is probably still going to have more snaps than Junior when it's all said and done, and that's why I have him where I have him. So yeah, I just I get why people are upset. I totally get it. He was on my list, but when we do it together, he didn't make it. He'd probably be like 21 or 22.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean, I had guys who I don't think you would have included, and you had guys that I wouldn't have included.
Right.
And the way we did the list going back and forth, that's kind of how it ended up.
Absolutely. So, I mean,
somebody had to get left off. But again, like we went 1 through 20. There's 22 guys on a 2 deep. So literally he's sitting right outside that.
Look, I'll take the criticism, and that's fine. And I think he's a good player. I really do. And
I do too.
I actually said, somebody in the chat said something. I said out loud something about I don't even think that's his best position. And then somebody said, do you think they should move him back to linebacker and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to have much better luck there.
So that was my point.
That's part of why they moved him. So.
I think Junior is a better linebacker than he is an edge player, but he would also not play at linebacker. Yeah. So they moved him to edge where he has an opportunity to play. So again, two things can be correct at the same time. I think he's a better linebacker, but he had no prayer of playing with that linebacker depth.
The linebacker room is just stacked right now.
Correct.
Like Kahanu Kia was out all of last season, and he was kind of starting to make, little waves before he got hurt, So like if you brought Tuihalamaka back in there, I think that Kahanu Kia might end up ahead of him right now even. So it's a stacked room.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I support the decision to move him to edge. I just don't think that's the best position for him.
Right.
That's my only point.
Right. Yeah, not his best position, but because of what's in the linebacker room, he's still has a better opportunity to contribute at end than he would.
Yeah, not his best position, but his best opportunity to play.
Yes.
Yeah.
I talked with Miami insider David Lake today, and we're gonna have that interview at the end after we finish up with rapid fire today. So here is what Lake said about Carson Beck in his recovery this spring.
So all we could see during the spring was, kind of some rehab work. So, we can watch essentially 20 minutes of practice, which is kind of just like individual drills and walkthroughs.
Right.
And during
Very
that,
similar here.
During that portion of practice, he was working with their return to play specialist. And what he was doing was laying on his back and kind of just throwing the ball straight up in the air, catching it, throwing it straight up in the air, catching it. And, I mean, obviously I'm not a doctor, but like each week you could see like the goal was to throw it a little higher, throw it a little higher, throw it a little higher. So he was doing that. And then after the spring game, when we met with Coach Cristobal as a media corps after the spring game, he did say the week after the spring game, he was going to start doing some light tossing. So I think he is on track. Everything I've heard is the recovery is on track. And, I think Brock Purdy kind of carved the path for this specific type of UCL surgery, which is kind of the new UCL surgery, not necessarily Tommy John. It's the same injury, but it's a different technique, I guess, in terms of the repair and recovery. So, and Brock Purdy's surgery was later than Carson's. So there's a lot of optimism that he'll be good to go, not only for fall camp, but also the start of the season. But it's a touchy thing with recovery from injuries. So hopefully there's no setbacks or hiccups in this recovery process.
That, Vince, is blank.
Great news. I am a firm believer that I want Notre Dame or anybody
no excuses
to play against the best. Like I don't, first game of the year, they're going into the Rock and, all of these different things. And I very much want them to be at full strength. I want Miami at full strength. So when Notre Dame does beat them down, there's no excuse. So I don't even know who their backup quarterback is. That shows you how much I've looked at Miami up to this point in May.
Well, I don't think they know who their backup quarterback is because you heard him talking about the fact that, they got the first part of practice, viewing, and that was it. He said that in the past they've had, more practice access, but this spring, for whatever reason, they didn't. And that was without, even having Carson Beck in there. Yeah. what they were able to glean, and in terms of the backups, I don't think that there was a whole lot there.
I very much want Carson Beck behind center when Notre Dame plays Miami. Very, very, very much. I just don't think he personally matches up very well against Notre Dame's defense. So bring it on. I'm happy to hear that he is progressing nicely, and hopefully he will be there at quote unquote 100% by August 30th or 31st or whatever day it is.
Yeah, and I'm all in on that as well. And I think we probably slandered Miami's offensive line earlier this spring. I mean, it does sound like that's actually going to be one of the strengths, I think, that they have. So it's going to be a lot different quarterback as well, because as you'll hear in the interview here in a little bit, like they were very Cam Ward dependent. And like David said, that was probably intentional. But that also means that this year's team with Carson Beck, a lot different quarterback than Cam Ward, it's not going to look the same. So I'm excited. I want to see Miami with Carson Beck.
Me too.
Out there. Because I think that man for man across the roster, I think that Notre Dame is better than Miami.
Me too. And I want them to be at full strength so that is not an excuse. So yeah. I'm actually really looking forward to this game. I really am looking forward to the game. And Notre Dame, Miami, again, rivalry. Let's go. Let's have some fun with this thing. I'm excited about it.
Salty said he had too much caffeine. He actually went to the dentist before doing the interview today. So take that back. You got to give him props having the Novocaine in the face, and the whole thing. All right, I didn't have this ready to go. We're gonna play our new favorite game.
Yes, sir.
And we are going to look at the Miami Hurricane football schedule for the upcoming season.
Okay.
And then we're going to guess what their Vegas over-under win total is for the schedule. Okay, so here we go. They start off, of course, with the game against Notre Dame, August 31st. Then they take on Bethune-Cookman in South Florida in back-to-back games.
Good old Bethune-Cookman.
Then it's interesting, back-to-back here. First they host Florida, then they go to Florida State with a bye week in between. So that's an interesting little part of the schedule.
Right there. It is.
Then they host Louisville, host Stanford, go to SMU, host Syracuse, who they lost to last year, host NC State, and then they finish with their last two games on the road at Virginia Tech and at Pittsburgh. So, not the toughest of schedules for the Miami Hurricanes there, Vince. Do you have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think, just going through this, obviously I think the first game is going to be a loss. I think Florida and Florida State might be a 1-1 situation, win one, lose one, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think Louisville is a bit of a toss-up. I think SMU could potentially be a toss-up, but I'm going to give SMU, the credit since they were the ones in the playoff and Miami wasn't.
Well, and look, the problem with with the transfer portal is, Miami's loading up on transfer portal players. Everybody's loading up on transfer portal players. Like Louisville has shown that they're going to lean somewhat heavily into the transfer portal. Florida State obviously is going to have to lean heavily into the transfer portal.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think, there's going to be some revenge for Miami against Syracuse. I don't think Syracuse is going to be as good as they were. And then they finish up. They could potentially finish the season 4-0. But I think up to that point, they only have about 4 wins to begin with. So I'm setting it at 8.5.
I think that's the safe bet. I feel like yesterday it's either 8.5 or 9.5. Like, the question is, would Vegas look at this and think that this is a 10-win team? Defense is going to be a big question. They did just fire their defensive coordinator, brought in a new defensive coordinator. They were not a great defensive team.
They were terrible
last year. Yeah. Exactly. Now, they feel like their secondary is going to be better this year because of the transfer portal, but I think it's got to be 8.5. I think this is going to be 8.5 for Miami because, like, you look at the fact that they lost to Syracuse last year with a chance to get in the ACC championship game and a college football playoff appearance on the line with the guy who ended up being the number one draft pick in the NFL.
And they blew it.
I think it's going to be 8.5.
That's where I'm at too.
Okay, so we're both at 8.5 on Miami's over under. 8.5 it is.
God, I'm good at this game, man.
You are
this game.
Nailing it.
Let's go. Let's go. This was one I would have to pause on to say where I would go with this, over or under. Going into the season, obviously the whole reason for this is we don't really know a ton about all of these teams, and we're taking for granted like what they did last year and some things like that, right? And that's what the betting sites are doing as well. If they can win a couple of these toss-up games, then you take the over and you feel pretty good about it. I don't think this is a playoff team. I really don't.
No, I don't either.
There's too many holes, and the level of play at the quarterback position, in my opinion, has gone down. You're not going to be able to count on Carson Beck the way you counted on, Cam Ward last year. And so who's going to bail you out in those times of trouble, right? As Simon and Garfunkel would say. So I'm just not that confident right now in who Miami is. So
saying Beck's not going to be the bridge over troubled waters, is that?
Nailed it. You nailed it. See, every once in a while I'll throw a music reference. I'm glad you picked it up. I would take the under right now. I really would.
I don't know if I lean toward the over, but it's probably one that I wouldn't want to touch just because of all the things that you're talking about.
I know. There's just a lot of unknowns with Miami right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, again, like that. I think it's good. It's like that with so many teams, just because.
For sure.
Because of the transfer portal.
It's so much harder with the portal, man.
I know.
Like from year to year to year, a team can be completely different from one year to the next, both bad and good. It's like free agency with no limits, and it's wild.
So ESPN released its second edition of Full Court Press over the weekend. Did you see any of this by any chance?
Only what you showed me.
Okay.
Or what I read.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something I did want to watch. I just haven't had an opportunity to do it yet.
It's the behind the scenes doc that ESPN did. Last year they did Caitlin Clark and two other players. They followed the players throughout the season, and then they, did I think it was like a 3-part documentary, Full Court Press, at the end of the season. So this year's features Hannah Hidalgo, as well as former LSU star Flo-J Johnson and former USC forward Kiki Iriafen. So in episode 1, they showed the Notre Dame win at USC, like highlights and all that stuff and some of the buildup. And so that game, of course, was last November. And so they show before the game, USC's head coach, Lindsay Gottlieb, she's got her team in there in the locker room, and she's giving them, like the
rah-rah,
the pregame speech and the whole thing. And then she includes it's not a matter of how hard you get hit. It's how hard you can get hit and get back up and keep going. And then, it's like, and then she goes, "Who said that?" And they were all like, "Rocky." She was, "No, Michael B. Jordan." And then Michael B. Jordan walks in the door. You might remember Snoop Dogg, Michael B. Jordan were like the two big stars sitting courtside.
I remember
that game, if you saw that. So
Snoop Dogg left early.
Right. And I think Michael B. Jordan might have left a little bit early as well. But my question is, would you introduce the big star to your team right before they're getting ready to go out of the locker room and play a big game like that?
Absolutely 100% no. Visitors come to the locker room when it's over, when you're celebrating. That's when visitors come to the locker room. There's no chance in hell that would have ever happened. I would not have allowed that in any way, shape, or form, because now your focus is off. And I'm not saying that's why they lost, but it throws your focus off. If you're focused on the game and you bring in some heartthrob, movie star and into a room with a bunch of women. And I'm not trying to make it men versus women, but like,
no, but look,
why would you do that?
Like you need to see if you can find that episode, and because like the head coach herself was like, the look on her face was like, oh, can you believe it? Michael B. Jordan just walked into the locker room.
Threw her off her game.
You talk about diverting your focus before you're getting ready to play a big game. It's like now you're all starstruck and you're supposed to go out there and it's like, oh, and then he's sitting there courtside as well.
Like,
because I guarantee you, neither of those guys, they may have shown up for like some USC, UCLA games afterwards, but neither one of those guys, Snoop or Michael B. Jordan, had been to a USC game prior to that. Like that Notre Dame USC game was one of the biggest home games they've had in probably 10 or 15 years.
I don't even know who to use as an example, but do you bring a supermodel into the men's locker room right before they're about to play a big game? No, absolutely not. You don't.
Or like, I don't know, Jennifer Lawrence or someone like that.
Olivia Dunn. Actress. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, Olivia Dunn. That's a good one.
I just no.
I'd say Taylor Swift, but
I don't know who the college guys would get excited about. Not the point. The point is,
but I agree. You do it afterwards, or you do it like at practice, or like
the day before,
like that. Yeah,
or 2 days before, or something along those lines. But not before the game, and not at halftime. Absolutely not. Nope. No. Bad move on her part. Again, is that why they lost? No, they lost because Notre Dame beat them. But that doesn't help the situation.
No, I completely agree. I was just looking at another comment that popped up here in the chat. Be sure to hit the like button before you leave the show tonight. Scott L. Esquire, back on the Miami conversation, says, I guess the over-under from Miami will depend on how badly Notre Dame breaks them. I'm not talking about beating them. I'm talking about the physical toll and lost confidence. And that's, again, I feel like Miami's offensive line is going to be pretty good. I think big questions about their defensive line and, like potentially, like you talk about the physical toll, like the toll that Notre Dame's offensive line can kind of dish out on that side of the ball.
A game like that, he talks about just, beating them physically, mentally, all of those different things. When you've got a team that's primarily built in the transfer portal, that can be something that can break a team mentally because they're like, well, why the hell did I come here? You know what I mean? Like, this is clearly not what I thought it was going to be. And to do that early on in the season, that's the problem with the portal. You know what I mean? It's very difficult. If you have adversity early, it's going to be difficult to keep that team together because
test your team when you're basically bringing in a bunch of, guns for hire.
They're mercenaries. Like that's what the portal is. And look, Notre Dame's not immune to it. They brought in some mercenaries too, but it's not the core of their team.
That's exactly it. Because like the difference, Miami's got right around like 17 players from the portal, which is a lot more than what Notre Dame is at, and like typically does add from the portal. It's about double, I think, what Notre Dame adds. Notre Dame is very selective filling holes,
Yep. 100%.
So I'm surprised that this is the first time that this has been asked before we get into the Miami interview here. Scott's asking about the viral video of Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles. And all I'm going to say is this. I was not standing there. I'm not a lip reader. I have no idea what was said. Now, did it look like they were in a pretty good disagreement about something? Yes. But I would also say that context matters because, again, we don't know exactly what they were talking about. And there are a lot of people who want to apply what they've seen in that video to like whatever did or didn't happen during the season.
Right.
Personally, my take, because obviously once Olivia announced that she was going to the portal, both of them, had some different comments on social media. And I think that whatever that was about Friday night before the game at Purcell Pavilion, the WNBA exhibition game, I think that was much more about, you know, whatever, you know, hey, you were saying this, or you were like, that's kind of, again, not being there, no idea what was said.
Sure.
I don't think it had anything to do with, you know, like what people think, you know, was like a fractured locker room, which I don't think it was a fractured locker room, by the way, during the season. So, yeah.
Context matters. I agree.
So that's all I've got to say about that.
All right, Forrest.
So Scott apparently hasn't seen the video. He said, "What happened?" There's a video of it's in the tunnel, like right outside where Notre Dame's locker room typically is, and Hidalgo and Miles are like both in street clothes, and you see them kind of walking toward each other, and then they kind of reach out, you know, like slap each other's hands or whatever, but then they kind of, you know, they start going back and forth about something, and then roughly 30 seconds or so into this, a security guard walks up to him and, you know, looks like he said, "Hey, you should probably like take this, you know, like someplace else." And then Hassan Prosper, who's Hannah Hidalgo's best friend on the team, was there as well. And, you know, she showed up right before the security guard, and then they all kind of, you know, walked out of sight of the cameras. And I did see someone posted today, there was like from the other side of the tunnel, because someone basically, it was a fan with you know, with their phone recorded this video and then posted it on Twitter, and there was someone on the other side of the tunnel area that like took a picture, and you could see her, like the person who was, you know, taking the cell phone video.
Oh, could you really?
Yeah. And you could also see you know, like much more clear, you know, like exactly like the security guard and like where he was initially, like in that picture in the second, you know, like the second vantage point, you could see like the security guard is basically looking at him, you know, as they're, you know, kind of going back and forth.
Probably trying to size up the situation and be like, you know what? I think I'm going to step in and move them inside.
Yeah.
Because
this is just based on what we see. It appeared that, you know, like their voices were probably starting to, you know, like carry a little bit. And, you know, there were people around with cameras and stuff like that. And I think he recognized that and was like, okay, let's get it out of here, you know, in a very non-confrontational manner. I thought that, you know, like he acted very professionally about it, and everyone just kind of moved it along out of the tunnel, out of the sight of, you know, cameras and everybody else. So.